We are happy to have this discussion today, and we look forward to hearing from you all as we engage stakeholders. I'm Nancy Twom-Aquaboa with the Los Angeles Housing Department, and I am joined by another LHD staff person here, Micah. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi all, I'm Micah O'Brien. I am a student professional worker at the Policy and Research Unit at LAHD.
Great, thank you. We also have staff representing the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, so please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ann Lynch with the Housing Authority, City of Los Angeles, and I think we also just have Han. Han?
Yes, hi, hello.
I will now turn it over to Mosaic Community Planning, who is partnering with Los Angeles Housing Department and HACLA in developing the city's 5-year assessment of fair housing plan. So they will be facilitating our discussion today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Mayu with Mosaic Community Planning, and we'll be doing a short presentation and then talking through our discussion questions.
Hi, Jessica Fish, also with Mosaic.
And I think too, we have a pretty small group. So we'd also like to invite everyone who's joined the meeting to take a moment and take yourself off mute and just let us know your name and what organization you're representing. Or if you'd prefer to leave that information in the chat, that's an option as well.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Gallardo. I'm here from the Department of City Planning, Housing Policy Division.
Great, thanks for joining us. We also have Daniel Inez, who's the Horticulture and Transportation Specialist at Independent Living Center of Southern California, and Paavo Monkanen, sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of that, who is a UCLA professor. And Sandra Lopez, the Disability Support Services Advisor for LAUSD's Division of Adult and Career Education. Let's see. Did I skip anyone, or we've got everyone? All right. Well, I'll start with an overview of the study and kind of what we're working on. I know it may be something that some of you have heard a lot about and already have some information on, but I think we'd like to just start with a quick overview so we're all on the same page. Through this project, we'll be looking at the fair housing landscape in the city of Los Angeles, essentially looking at whether all residents are able to access housing that is suitable for them, free from unlawful discrimination. We'll also be looking at how well people are able to access different community resources and opportunities depending on where they live. So I think particularly some of the agencies that you all are representing or the work that you do impacts people's ability to access things like education or adult education programs, things like that. So that's kind of the goal of this meeting, to talk about those topics, and we'll hit more on that as we get to those discussion questions. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, requires any city or county that gets grant money, federal grant money for community development or affordable housing, to complete these types of studies every 5 years. And additionally, as of 2018, the state of California also requires public agencies, including cities, counties, and housing authorities, to prepare fair housing assessments. So generally, when we talk about fair housing, we're talking about everyone's right to participate in the housing market. So to own, sell, purchase, or rent housing of their choice without fear of unlawful discrimination. So that includes things like renting or buying a home, but also obtaining insurance, having access to housing loans, having fair property appraisals, anything involved in that kind of process of how you are able to secure housing. So under the Federal Fair Housing Act, everyone is protected from housing discrimination based on race or ethnicity, color, religion, national origin, sex, family status, and disability. Additionally, the state of California has a series of laws that expanded fair housing protections to include several more protected classes that you see listed there on this slide. So they include marital status, age, ancestry, immigration status, language, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, genetic information, source of income, veteran or military status, occupation, and other arbitrary factors. So you can see there that the state has a much bigger umbrella of fair housing protections than we have federally. In 2015, HUD adopted a new fair housing rule called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or you'll hear us call it AFFH. And that really calls on cities to take a more critical look at the role of housing in their communities. So it required cities to look at access to community resources and opportunities, things like schools, jobs, transit, grocery stores, healthcare facilities, and a clean environment. It also said that cities need to consider whether everyone has equal access to neighborhoods with these types of opportunities, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or other protected class. The AFH rule also requires cities to take meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation and to create communities that are inclusive for everyone. Cities must work to reduce affordable housing needs and other barriers that limit access to opportunities and resources. So rather than just looking at housing discrimination, now we're thinking of housing more broadly in terms of kind of how it impacts all these other aspects of your life. Under the Trump administration, HUD pared back its AFFH rule, essentially suspending the requirement to conduct a fair housing study. But then early in the Biden administration, the rule was reinstated, so requiring everyone to have up-to-date fair housing studies. And that's the rule that we're under now. Last month, HUD released a new proposed rule that would further refine what these studies look like and what they should contain, which is currently still a draft, and HUD is taking comments on it. So it's something that we're monitoring as we're doing this work. But as you can see, the national fair housing landscape has evolved significantly over the last several years. But overall, the idea of fair housing has broadened. So looking at a lot of other things within the community besides housing discrimination. The AFH report, the Assessment of Fair Housing, will include a variety of components. We'll be looking at demographics and patterns related to residential segregation, integration, and income. We'll identify areas of the city with high levels of racial segregation, including those with high levels of poverty and affluence. So kind of looking at how income interplays with some of those patterns and where people live. We'll also look at access to opportunities like schools, jobs, transit, and a clean environment, and whether everyone throughout the city has fair access to those types of resources. We'll consider housing costs and whether affordable housing need varies by protected class. We'll also look at public housing, tax credit developments, and other types of affordable housing to see what is available and in what parts of the city. And then finally, maybe the main goal of this study is that we will have a summary of key fair housing issues, along with identifying goals and strategies to address them over the next 5 years. So a plan to make some progress on reducing fair housing issues in the city. Community input, including the input that we'll get from you tonight, will help inform all aspects of the study. In In addition to meeting state and federal requirements, the AFH will be important as local leaders make decisions about housing policies and resources. It will be built on community inputs and is one way residents can make their opinions known to the city and HACLA leadership. This study will advance past fair housing efforts, including the city's recent housing element and its previous assessment of fair housing that was done in 2018. Ultimately, what will come out of the plan is, as I mentioned, an action-oriented strategy that can impact the city's decision about how to spend grant funds it receives for housing, community development, and homelessness. But the strategies will also shape other projects, programs, and policies by the city or HACLA. The final plan will be adopted by City Council and HACLA leadership, and it represents a commitment by both of those agencies to implement activities that expand fair housing and stop future housing discrimination for all residents. Examples of past programs and policies that grew out of previous fair housing studies include things like the city's law around source of income protection. So protecting folks from discrimination based on their source of income or whether they use a housing choice voucher. The city's tenant anti-harassment ordinance, eviction efforts like Stay Housed LA, and other programs like that that have grown out of past fair housing analyses. Before we get to our discussion, a quick overview of our timeline for the project. So you can see here that we'll have quite a few opportunities for engagement. We did some community meetings at the end of last year that I think some of you may have joined some of those. And now this month we are doing a series of these stakeholder consultation meetings. At the same time, another part of this, another engagement aspect for this study, we're doing a series of focus groups with residents. So making sure that we're talking to folks who are typically directly impacted by housing issues and getting their input for the plan. In the spring, we'll be working on putting the draft together so that by July, we'll have some preliminary findings and strategies to present for feedback and refinement. So we hope that you will stay in tune with the project and join us again in July to provide some additional feedback and let us know what we got right or what can be adjusted further. Later in the summer, the draft will be available for public comment for 45 days. And then we'll make any final revisions to prepare for a fall approval by City Council and HACLA. So at this point, I'd like to stop for a minute and take any questions that anyone might have about the project we're working on, the timeline, kind of what it will include, anything like that. We have a pretty small group, so feel free to unmute yourselves and share if you have any questions. I think we might have had one person joining by phone, so you can use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise your hand if you're on the phone. Before we get into our discussion, any questions about the project?
Hey, this is Pavo at UCLA. Good to see you all. I have my child's laptop where the camera's like going at my nose. Sorry about that. I'm wondering about, so you mentioned the housing elements AFH section, which has done a lot of the background for you, fortunately. I wonder how are you going to redo that analysis, or can you just copy it over out of curiosity? And then especially I'm curious, I haven't heard from Matt Glesney about this point recently, about how the city's going to make sure that the rezonings plan that the housing element sets out is like actually followed through with. You know, I'm concerned, and I think some other people that are following that process pretty closely are concerned that the housing element does propose like an ambitious opportunity area focused rezoning plan, but then the actual rezoning itself is, you know, going to happen over a year or 2 or 3, and so whether or not those rezonings actually happen in the way that it sets out, I think would be a terrible thing if it didn't.
Sure. Well, I can answer your first question, I think. So we do have the fair housing study that was done for the housing element, and I think we're using it in a few ways. So looking at it a bit in terms of analysis in areas where there's room to update the analysis with more current data or expand on what was done there. We are doing that. Also making sure that we're hitting everything that HUD will ask for if there's anything that maybe doesn't align exactly with what the state required. But we're also, so a big part of what we'll be doing is looking at the recommendations from that plan and kind of seeing, so some have been put in place already, some not, kind of what comes next. So are there barriers to putting some of those in place? And if so, how can we address those? Are there, some things that have happened so far that need to go further? Things like that. So kind of seeing how we don't want to do recommendations in this study that are kind of treading that same ground. We want to make sure that we're inclusive of what happened previously and furthering it.
Yeah, and in regards to the rezoning question, so the assessment of fair housing won't address rezoning per se. That is, we understand as far as the deadline for the city to complete its rezoning is February 2025, I believe is our deadline, and I understand it is, it is ambitious, but that is something that the planning department is working on in terms of a rezoning plan. And I believe they're working on something where there will be a point in time for the public to be able to react to that. So there's more to come in regards to that plan that's taken place. So that is underway, that is happening, but that is not necessarily something that is going to be part of the assessment of fair housing work per se. But we will, as a city, be required to comply with that rezoning requirement that we have under the housing element. So that is happening. So the assessment of fair housing is going to be more so, the outcomes will be goals and strategies that we'll be developing over the next 5 years that will include various metrics and milestones for each one of those goals and strategies. And the idea is what's coming, many of the goals and strategies that come out of the assessment of fair housing plan will be also part of the city's consolidated plan, which will then have actual funding attached to it, right? And the idea is to really be able to really plan and request dollars to effectuate those particular goals and strategies that we have. So I know it's a lot going on in different plans and strategies, but more to come in regards to that. So in regards to the rezoning efforts, that's something we are working with the Department of City Planning on, the housing department is, but the Department of City Planning is the lead.
Yeah, I mean, it's the analysis of zoning as it pertains to segregation in cities. I think I'm preparing a comment for the new HUD rule on this because that's only one of the possible things you can analyze in the AFH when it seems like it should be the first thing that you analyze in the AFH. I mean, in the city of LA's housing element, it
Right.
data on 80% of the land in high opportunity parts of the city is single family zoned, and 80% of the land in the recaps is multifamily zoned. And so this, the role of zoning in this is so important. And so I don't know if it's at the point in your thinking about the AFA,
Absolutely,
you
yes.
can add that in. I think emphasizing that and being realistic about the political challenges of changing that, but then setting out some of the milestones around the need to change that. I think, I haven't seen an AFH that does that because it's politically challenging, but I think trying to use this as an opportunity to really push on this topic, I think would be great. The other thing, if we can throw things in as community members to this, I wonder, looking at policing as an important constraint to fair housing, I wonder if you had thought about that. I think planners don't worry about policing enough, and so that might be something you could add if you hadn't. if a community member comment can help you add that, I would like to submit that comment.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good comment. So we're definitely taking that and we're gonna be able to think through that. I think this is all what we're doing as part of these sessions. These are helping us to be able to develop our proposed goals and recommendations that we have. So that's definitely one that we will be taking back. So thank you for that.
And then, I mean, just thinking about the unequal spending of public money as part of the Fair Housing Challenge, you know, like the $1 Million Hoods program here at UCLA would have data on policing specifically, but I'm not sure whether you had contemplated analyzing kind of how public resources are spent throughout the city. And it might actually, you know, if you can get some of the controllers' time, I don't know if this stuff that they're looking at already, but linking up with what they're doing in terms of analyzing budget might be because planners often don't worry about budget enough either, I don't think.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're contemplating taking a look at kind of public spending and how that varies. So yeah. But certainly if there's a good data source related to policing, we'd be happy to have that and see how we can include that as well. Thanks. Any other questions or comments before we dive into the discussion? Okay, well, I will stop sharing my screen then, and we can kind of be able to look at each other and hopefully talk through some of these discussion questions that were in the agenda. And the first, I'll start by saying, definitely encourage everyone to share out loud if you can, that would be great. If not, you can leave comments in the chat, or we also have set up a SurveyMonkey form. So if you click on that link that Jessica just left in the chat, you'd be taken to a form that will have all of our discussion questions with space for written responses. So if there's things you want to share through that forum, please do. It will stay open for several days beyond tonight. So if you think of things after this meeting that you want to share, that'd be great. So the first question that we had draws a bit from what we heard in the community meetings last year and past research that identifies fair housing barriers related to high housing costs, housing instability and homelessness, overcrowding, and difficulty securing rental housing due to source of income discrimination and other barriers. Are these issues that you see amongst the folks that you serve, whether they be students, employees, or clients? Are there other forms of barriers that you see in your work? Any ideas? Do those sound like the right housing barriers that sound true to you that exist within the community, or are there others that you see? And then also maybe thinking about large institutions, educational institutions like USC or UCLA, how do they impact the availability of workforce housing in their neighborhoods?
That's an interesting question. I'm not really clear what the question is trying to get at, like in terms of having a lot of employees and students that have to be here.
I think that definitely student housing that might be in the area, but also I think a lot of times universities purchasing not necessarily housing, but land that might impact housing.
I mean, I think
something you see or not really.
I mean, UCLA is doing pretty good at dorm building, but could do a lot better. we're doing better than the other UCs, but I guess USC would have that more of an influence. If maybe that's what you're thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the UCLA, the relationship on housing between UCLA and its neighborhood is very different from USC and its neighborhood.
Sure,
The
definitely.
problem with UCLA is that we happen to be in an extremely affluent part of the city with single-family zones and mansions, right? And people that bought mansions next to a giant university suddenly are mad that there's a giant university next to them.
Maybe then, I think we may have maybe a couple folks related to adult education. So I'll ask this question. Are there common barriers you see for people trying to access adult education resources or workforce development resources, whether that's things like cost, time, being able to access transit to get there? Any barriers you see folks facing to accessing workforce development? Okay, well, we have quite a few specific questions, but maybe to warm us up a little bit before doing those, if there are folks who joined tonight who have, there are some fair housing issues that you see in LA. Maybe I haven't asked about them specifically, but what types of things do you see as sort of the biggest fair housing issues here? We've heard about zoning. Maybe no takers for that one.
Well, I mean, it's a complicated question because I think that, the unaffordability of housing in LA has a lot of negative impacts on different groups. It impacts different people in different ways. And so, the general problem of scarcity in housing right now, I think is really creating a lot of separate impacts, but at the root of the problem is the lack of housing, right? And so I think that, from this perspective of what the city can do, and vis-a-vis especially, universities and other educational institutions, I think opening up more housing opportunities near them would be the best thing to facilitate people living near the place they study. I think a lot of campuses in Southern California and I don't know how many in LA itself that were traditionally commuter schools are now shifting to have more of a kind of student body that wants to live near their place of education. And so facilitating that would be important.
Okay, so kind of some increased demand for housing around some of these schools that would necessitate some additional housing to alleviate price pressure. Does that?
I mean, one thing you might think about also is I think the success of the ADU programs statewide and LA in particular. I've heard those having less anti-discrimination protections than other kinds of rental housing, and so that might be a specific. That's a successful part of our state's housing policy, but it's the kind of housing that has discrimination.
Less anti-discrimination protection, so more prone to discrimination. Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. Maybe because they're often rented by
Yeah,
small
it's people,
landlords
if it's,
not
if
familiar.
it's actually the owner occupier renting out the house in the backyard, then
Okay.
people that they know perhaps, or people that they're going to be more discriminatory in who they rent it out to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something we heard about in the community meetings quite a bit. Maybe as smaller landlords that are not aware of housing laws, or I don't know, maybe they are aware but don't get caught if they don't follow them, so they don't feel the need to. Is there anyone else that would like to share anything? We've got some quiet folks today. Let me see. What about any barriers that you see people face to being able to access jobs? What are some of what kind of issues do people encounter in being able to maybe access something with good livable wages and benefits? Is location, transit, transportation, accessibility an issue? Any thoughts on that one? Sure. I mean, I think living wages, that's a good question. The question in the chat was, can you define living wage? And I think that probably varies based on the person that you're asking. But higher wage positions within the city.
I'm not gonna answer every question. Actually,
Okay,
sure. I could give you thoughts, but it's all about housing.
Okay.
Nice to meet you all. Sorry, I have to run.
Well, yeah, if anyone else would like to share any ideas, happy to take them. Otherwise, I think we can maybe jump back to the presentation. Nancy, unless you have any other questions.
No, I don't have any other questions. So yeah, we can move on.
Okay, I'll share our presentation back. Okay, jump back to this slide. So the the website that you see on the screen there, if you'd like to stay involved with the project, you can visit that. It's housing.lacity.org/residents/assessment of fair housing, with dashes between those last words. That site contains videos from the community meetings that happened last month, and we'll have information about future activities for engagement, as well as drafts of the study as they're available. Also on the website, you'll see a couple links to surveys that we have open. One is for organization representatives that we hope you all take. The second is a community member survey that's available in 7 different languages, and open to anyone living or working in the city of LA. And we'd ask for your help in disseminating those, and hope you'd be willing to share them with clients, neighbors, colleagues, anyone else who might be interested. If you'd be willing to share them on your organization's social media, that would also be great. And if anyone would like to get a hard copy of the survey, either for yourself or for others, please email lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org, and we'd be happy to get those to you. Let's see. With that, Nancy, I'll turn it over to you for our last slide.
Yes, it seems like we have city staff and HACLA staff that are pretty much here. Just want to thank you all for being here. If you haven't already joined our email list, you can do so, but I believe all of you you're on the list. So we would ask that you share this as far as getting the word out in regards to other folks who were not able to attend today and we have other upcoming assessment of fair housing stakeholder meetings and other things that are going to be happening through our process, such as Melissa mentioned, our assessment of fair housing draft is going to be made available to the public in the months ahead. So we do want to be able to have people who are to stay connected. So if you can share, among, within your networks, our webpage, our email account, lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. So people can submit their emails there and be asked to be added to our list. That would be great. That way that would help in terms of building up our contact list and really helping to ensure that we're informing as many people as we can about our work going forward. So that would be helpful, as well as sharing the webpage. We have a website with the updates in regards to our AFH work, which is here on this slide. So being able to direct people to that webpage would be great, because we will continue to post our updates about our work there. People can also stay connected, and we also have our surveys posted. So we have a survey for the public to complete, as well as a survey for stakeholders, for those who are actually providing services to residents in the city. So those two surveys are available. We want to make sure people are completing them, because at some point those surveys will eventually close, and we'll post when that date is, when we're closing the survey. So we do want to be able to continue to inform people about our work, people to stay connected, and we want to continue to receive input and feedback moving forward to help develop our AFH plan. So we are relying on you and hoping you can help get the word out. And that's all I have. So thank you for taking time to join us in today's AFH discussion. And we do have a link for the Survey Monkey as well that Melissa mentioned. So if you have thoughts, or others have thoughts, weren't able to join, it would be great if they can complete that. So we're able to ensure that we're collecting as much feedback as possible. So with that, say thank you and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.